So, I guess, I mean, we could sit here and talk about these things. We've read a lot of the, say, materials, we've studied this, but how do we talk about these ideas with those that are unfamiliar with them, those at the different levels of awareness, who might look upon this as elitist, or they look at it and think, well, they see the how it progresses, and they think it's, well, you think you're better than me, and because I'm, you're saying I'm here, and even though it's not the way we intended to do this, I can see how some people might think it, look at it and see it that way. So how do we talk about these ideas? How do we talk about consciousness and the levels of consciousness, levels of awareness, in such a way that people can grasp them and embrace them? Or what language do we use even to talk about it? Do we, well, let me give you an example of kind of what I, as far as like in my job, as a minister, and in a church that is, pluralistic. But I have to talk to people all the different levels, from traditional and rational and pluralistic, and so I always say, I'm a translator. I have to be able to speak to these different groups in their own language. And so I have to use different terminology. So somebody at the rational stage, I'm not using, somebody at the traditional stage, I'll use God language maybe if that's where they're at. But at the rational stage, I might, use not use God language at all because they're put off by it. Then somebody at the pluralistic stage, I'll be using God language, but it'll be different than the God language at the traditional stage because it's a more inclusive God. And, so it's just, so how do we talk about this? And what language should we be using to talk about it and to get it out there? So it's not just two people talking.
My answer to that actually is the book I wrote. And where this book came from is there was a group of probably about 300 people, and we were all connected by email and listserv and all that, and sometimes we would get together and some of us would meet, but we would discuss these real deep issues of life, the meaning of life, God, purpose, all that kind of stuff. And we had people in that group that were atheists, that were Muslim, that were Hindu, that were Christian, that were pagan, that were Wiccan, that were all of the above, none of the above. And so we would go through and have these conversations about these deep subjects, and I would watch these conversations, and I would watch for where the conversation got derailed. So, for example, you have an atheist and a Christian, and they're having a conversation. Well, as soon as the question of does God exist or not exist come up, that just ends constructive dialogue between them. They've just parted ways. So I kept watching these discussions and trying to watch for where they got derailed, and I looked for ideologically loaded language. I looked for culturally loaded language. I looked for, all these things that had baggage attached to it coming from culture of origin. And we kept sanding this down until eventually I would say, okay, this doesn't work. Using this conceptual framework doesn't work. This word doesn't work. This phrase doesn't work. Until finally, after about 3 years of this, we were able to carry these conversations from start to finish without losing people, because I had sanded off through learning from what they taught me all the things that were really difficult. And so this language of consciousness and the consciousness paradigm emerged as sort of a universal way of discussing these things, because if you use this language and you talk to somebody who's Christian, they kind of get the concept of what you're talking about. Or you can take it to somebody who's atheist, and they can kind of get the gist of what you're talking about. And it's sort of this universal translation language that everybody kind of understands, and very few people are offended by. And it's like this neutral common ground where people can come out of their school of origin, if you will, and have this discussion, and then take what they've learned and take it back to where they came from. And I finally, and I talk about this a lot in the places where I talk, I finally realized I was onto something when this lady invited me to come talk to her group. And so I told them, I said, I want everybody in this group to take like 2 minutes to figure out if you could have any question about life answered that you wanted to have answered, what would that question be? And they thought about it for about 2 minutes, and then afterwards I had everybody tell what their question was and a little bit about themselves. And there were about 30 people in the group, and so we went around the circle, and everybody told their question, a little bit about themselves. Well, essentially 29 of those questions were the same question, which is, how do we manifest what we really think is important in life into our life and our everyday activities? And so we use this language of consciousness that I've used to discuss the stuff in the book. We used that language and we talked about these really deep things, and we talked about very personal stuff and very deep stuff, and how do we get to a really good quality of life. And that conversation, everybody participated in it, and we probably went about 2 hours. And we got done, and at the very end, this guy said, this is really strange, but I just realized this. I'm Jewish. There's 2 Catholic priests right there. This guy's atheist. She's pagan. She says she's Wiccan. I don't know what these 3 are. And he said, we've had this heart-to-heart discussion about all of this stuff. He said, we haven't had a cross word between us. So we've shared some really meaningful things, and we've been able to transcend our boundaries. He said, I don't think I've ever seen that happen before. So I think this is how we do it, and I think this paradigm, or this packaging of metaphors, of symbols, of language and terminology is about as close as I can figure out how to get to a universal language that everybody kind of gets some meaning from, but more importantly, it's like a universal translator that helps people from different cultures have heart-to-heart discussions and share meaning from their different life experiences.
That makes sense. All our differences, looking at the common core, and it doesn't exclude people from their beliefs and their practices. It just, it just gives a way to come together.
Right.
It doesn't say, you don't need God, you don't need these different systems. It's just a way to talk about certain things that bring us together.
Right.
And actually, so much of the work that's been done around this has actually comes out of taking seriously what these different wisdom traditions have taught us.
Right.
And saying instead of looking at, arguing about, how they're different, looking at what do they have in common,
Right.
which is love, compassion,
Right.
Raising of awareness, and the higher you're, from a spiritual perspective, from the different spiritual traditions, the higher, you raise in the tradition, the more loving and caring you are,
Right.
And the more happy you are, all these different things, so that, all the fear drops away, and it's so looking at all those different things, it's a way to think about it. It's still, some people though, I think like the idea is the idea of consciousness. So I guess it's just being clear on, when we talked about that earlier on, just, we don't mean anything mystical. We don't mean anything,
Right.
There's nothing, that you have to believe.
Right.
And that's one of the emphasis I try to, work with people on. This is not a matter of belief. You don't have to believe this
Right.
system. It's not about belief.
Right.
You just, is it practical? Does it work?
Right.
And then, if it does, then work with it.
Right.
If not, then throw it aside.
Right.
Oftentimes, we use, you talked about tool metaphors. Others use the language of maps. It's a map.
Yeah.
And is it useful? A map is only useful if it, if it represents what's out there and it can get you from A to B.
Right.
And if it doesn't, then get rid of the map.
Right.
And so this is all this is. It's just,
Right.
it's a map, it's a tool, a way to get there. And so, I think it's just so much of it, I think, is just talking about it, and not, allowing ourselves to, to introduce the concepts, because, everybody I talk to, they understand it, and, without, because there's no belief. It's just a description of what they already experience.
Right.
Yeah, and that's an important part of it is, nothing fancy. it does, you don't have to
Right.
give up anything either. And
Right.
you don't have to believe anything new, and you don't have to give up anything. It's just
Right.
understanding that this is just a description of the way things already are.
Right. And I think that ties into another one of these questions that we have, which is how does the consciousness paradigm relate to God or divinity or that kind of thing? And the way I look at it is it's like asking how does a personal fitness training program relate to God and divinity? Well, the essence of raising consciousness is training your mind how to work effectively and how to not get tripped up by common mind traps that we've seen humanity wrestle with, for as long as recorded history. And if it's just which it is, just a means of improving the way that the mind functions and interacts with reality, it's like going to the gym. You can come to the gym as a Christian and work your body out, or you can come to the gym as an atheist and work the body out. And it's really independent of your religious views. It's just a means of exercising the mind and making the mind work better.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of putting it, and I think it's something that most people can grasp onto, and I think we do get caught up in definitions of the divine and in different ways, and those are unique to our perspective, and I think I think the model actually reinforces that, in that we are each an individual with our own perspective, and we each have, we only get to see the eternal in one piece of it.
Right.
And so, and understanding that, any God that might exist is bigger than our own unique perspective, or bigger than the box we want to put that
Right.
God into.
Right.
And so this allows it to everybody have their own perspective of the eternal,
Right.
and or saying there isn't. I mean, which is also a valid perspective. And
Right.
but I like that, to be able to, a good way to come together through an interfaith dialogue, and keeping the dialogue alive, and learning and seeing the people behind the beliefs.
Right.
It's like we were talking about earlier, with seeing the people behind the riot gear and the police, seeing the people behind their different religious traditions, and recognizing they're just people just like us,
Right.
who want to be happy. They want to feel safe and secure in their homes, and they want to love their kids, raise their kids, and
They want their kids to have a good future.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the bottom line for everybody I know, and everybody
Right.
I've ever seen, alive in the world.
Right.
Even think of what people we identify as terrorists. That's all they want too.
Right.
They want to feel safe and secure
Right.
in their homes, and they're obviously not, which has taken them to that place. And so understanding that there is a human being there, and that they can be reached.
Right. You want to tackle reincarnation?
Yeah, we could do that.
Read the question.
So, is the theory of reincarnation related to consciousness in any way? And if so, how do you think it connects? This is an interesting one.
Yes.
Because I see reincarnation as one of those beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of those things we can't prove. And so while I think it's an interesting concept, and one I like to explore and think about in different ways, and it's one that can pose, like the divinity question, about it can be one of those elements that separates and divides.
Mm-hmm.
And since we can't necessarily prove it, and we can't observe it, then in my opinion doesn't really belong in this, even though I know we use the word consciousness in different ways, and so I can see how the idea of being, well, if one consciousness goes from one lifetime to a next, but we're using consciousness in a different way. I think it's not, because that type of consciousness is the idea of a soul that transfers from one life to the next, or something like that. So to me, that is something that doesn't necessarily fit into this conversation. It's not excluded by this understanding, but it isn't covered in it.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree. I think from the perspective of consciousness, it's exactly like you said. reincarnation is a way of looking at reality. And if it helps you and works for you, use that tool. If it doesn't help you and work for you, don't use that tool. That's how I see it.
I mean, it's an interesting concept, and I love to play with it in my mind
Mhm.
and consider its implications. But yeah, that's as far as I go with it.
Right.
And because it does have moral implications, it's a great way of looking at things. But it is something we can't prove.
Yeah. What? How would you describe the consciousness movement?
I would say, I would look at it, I guess I would kind of look at it as it's in its adolescence, early adolescence, just starting to take its own shape and form.
Mm-hmm.
And that as a movement, I think a lot of the ideas have been kicking around for a long time, and that I think of an adolescent is, that's when a person starts to identify, they start to really become a person.
Right.
They really start to have a clear identity of themselves and their roles and how they interact with the world. And their rational mind, they're in child development, the rational mind is kicking in adolescence. Of course, also so are all their hormones, and and you have a lot
fun
of
stuff.
You have a lot of conflict, and you have a lot of change that happens fast, and it's a transformative time in a life. And so I would think that the consciousness movement that's been around for a while in different forms. But I think in the form that we're talking about, maybe it's really started to take shape in the last 25 years or so, and that it's just getting to the point of adolescence. It's starting to really become a clear sense of this is what the movement is.
Mm-hmm.
This is where, what we do, how we interact. We're not in complete agreement. There's different factions within it that say, which is good, because we need that conversation.
Right.
We don't. If we're all in agreement, then we're becoming an ism,
Right.
and we're becoming we're becoming fixed, and now we're just in an echo chamber, and we've lost progress. But I think to all this interaction, there's lots of turmoil. There's times a lot of things going on, a lot of great things. We're learning great things about how the human body and human mind work, and that it's all tying together and affirming a lot of these ideas, and that. And so I just see this as this emerging movement that transcends all the different religions, all the different, transcends and includes. I think that's important. Right. That we understand it. It transcends and includes all these different things.
Right.
It's an evolutionary step that transcends and includes all the different wisdom traditions, includes science, and includes all the different social sciences. So it's inclusive of all these different things, so that anytime that there's a discovery in each one of these different things, it's helping all the others at the same time.
Right.
And so that you can be a sociologist and and be in communication with a biologist and understand that your work is connected.
Mm-hmm.
They aren't isolated. And I think, because so often the sciences and social sciences have all been doing their own thinking, each thinking they were the right ones. This is the best way to look at it. And now the consciousness movement, as I see it, is bringing these ideas together, and so that sociologists and biologists are actually working together and see that what they're doing is all part of the same big picture. And while they're both right, they're not completely right. They're just part of the truth.
Yeah.
And so we work to bring it all together. And the more we learn, the more the movement can be progressed forward. And I don't think there's an end to where it can be, and that it can just keep going forward, and we keep exploring, who we are as individuals and as a species, and as part of the larger whole on the whole planet, and then expand off this planet.
Yeah. So if you were to try and describe to somebody kind of what are the identifying characteristics of the consciousness movement, what would you say those are?
I guess what comes to mind is there is a respect for both science and religion, that there is an understanding that they both are tools and to get us to a place. And I think that's one of the first clear things that says somebody has thought more than what they've been taught, that they've looked beyond and can see that that life is more complex than any single worldview will allow, and whether it be a religious or scientific worldview, that everything is more complex. And so once people can hold both of those, what many people consider conflicting ideas, and hold them at the same time,
Right.
then that's kind of almost the core basis for me, of the movement, is that there's a basic understanding that life is so complex, that the world, the universe is so far beyond our understanding, that we need then to have a language and to talk about that transcends our differences, which is what we've been taught. And so I think that's kind of maybe the core element,
Yeah.
and then there's the self-identity issues, there's all these different aspects, and I think we see some of this, and maybe people who don't use consciousness language might be part of it, but I think it's the potential is there, and I guess that would be the core thing for me.
Okay.
And so how would you answer your own question?
I very much agree with what you said, that what you just talked about. I think that is one of, if not the central thing that's going on in the movement. But I think the other thing that I would talk about is I see a core element of this being a transition from a competitive mindset in society to a cooperative mindset in society. And it's different than what we've seen in the past. In the past, we have seen in some communities, we've seen this transition. I mean, in certain communal communities, in certain churches, we've seen a spirit of cooperation and even a spirit of love. But this goes beyond that. It's more than I'm going to cooperate with you and we'll have peace and I'm going to treat you with respect and dignity. It goes beyond that to say, I recognize you as a part of me, and we're all in this win or lose together. And it's very much what you said. As a, let's say, a biologist, my work, not only is it benefiting me in what I do, but I'm recognizing that there's a wider connection where I'm connected to all the other work that's being out there, and we're moving forward as a single organism. And even if I can't see how what I'm doing helps you, I recognize that is there, that is in play. And I think that recognition of the pervasive interconnectedness of everybody, I think that awareness and recognition is a central part of the consciousness movement, which has not been there before. It's been hinted at and pointed to by the sages, and the visionaries and the luminaries that we've seen in philosophy and that have come out of religion and the esoteric schools. They pointed at it, but it's never been seen at the mass level before. And I think that's a pivotal transformation that's coming about as a result of the consciousness movement, is people in mass are beginning to see it.
Yeah.
And that's what's new, that's never existed before.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. That's a great point, that interdependence is key to it, and that understanding that we're not just, I'm not going to help you because it helps me, I'm going to help you because you are me.
Exactly.
Is a great point. And it's easy to love others who are like me and who we're in a supportive, but but it's still us versus them.
Right.
And instead it's us and another us over
Right.
there, and that's another us over there, and another us over here, and we're all in this together. And
Right.
I actually, you mentioned the word competitive, in the competition, and that's one of the words I like to go back to, and to its founding, and to the Greeks. We get it from the Greeks, and it comes from the word to struggle together,
Mm-hmm.
because in the Greeks, when they competed, and when it was an understanding that I am better because the better you are, the better I am, because we're struggling together.
Right.
And that even though one might win the competition, they both won because they're both now been improved by them working together, and they had a great, and instead of, our modern understanding competition with winners and losers, and
Right.
one must win, and they really understood each other, that no matter who actually might have won the competition, everybody won just by being there and participating.
Right.
And I think, and getting back to that understanding that
Yeah.
we, yes, it is cooperation, but, we can have competitive, interaction, but understanding that because that makes us each stronger at the same
Right.
time. And so that way, I think, in that case, we were both cooperative and competitive, but in
Exactly.
this classic understanding of competition, rather than our more modern one,
Right.
which is a more cutthroat.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point. Okay, where would you say the ideas and the philosophy that are coalescing as the consciousness movement, where do you see as kind of a quick sketch of the origin of those? Where does it come from?
Well, I think it emerged. I mean, when I talk and I hear like, I'm missing the name, I'm forgetting the name, but Don Beck's mentor, and I forget his name right now.
Oh, yeah, Graves.
Graves, yeah, and hearing his story on how he came to his ideas and how Ken Wilber came to his ideas, and I think that it just kind of, there was an understanding that there was, when we sanded off the edges, all the differences of all the different like social sciences, I think is how like Graves started it with psychology, and with, and you look at all different social, all these different theories, and then taking in, the wisdom traditions, and seeing, and you sand off all the differences, and seeing that they had more alike than they had different.
Right.
But they just use different languages, different words
Right.
to describe the same thing. And I think the more we came together, and I think it was, it's about, the world coming together. I mean, this is all, post, or, towards the end of the late 20th century, when these ideas were emerging. And so where we actually started to become, we started, to understand that the people all around the world are more similar than different. And science was taking giant leaps forward, and DNA, and understanding that at the genetic level we are all the same. We are
Right.
more alike than we want to admit.
Right.
We have different skin colors and different languages, but we are so much alike. And I think the more we discovered through science and through psychology and all these different things, we just learned that there's a uniformity to it all, and that says we need to look beyond these differences. And I think a lot of it just came out of that just place coming together. And I think it's cranking up now with the internet, and we can get online and talk to anybody around the world.
Right.
And we can access the knowledge of the world's wisdom traditions, the knowledge of science. Everything is accessible.
Mm-hmm.
And in translation, we can read just about anything we want, and be exposed to so much more that was just impossible in the first,
Right.
previously.
Right.
And so it's a coming together, and it's basically, kind of maybe even look at it, kind of like in the human brain, and which is, the more you learn, the more connections you have.
Right.
So you just and it keeps expanding, and then the more connections you have, the more potential it has.
Right.
And then the more potential you have, the more you learn, and then
Right.
and it's just a series of more and more connections, and there's this unlimited connection. And so I think it's, the conscious movie is coming out of, it's an emerging quality of us learning more and connecting more with different people who act and look differently than we, and think differently. And the more connections we're making, it's emerging out of that.
Yeah.
And it's one of my favorite. The emergence of it is critical, because it didn't nobody invented it. It emerged out of the changing conditions of the world. And there wasn't one person that says, I started this.
Right.
And it just emerged at different people at different times. And, and we came to it, at different places in our own lives, because we kept beating heads against, well, this is too limiting, this religion is too this is this.
Right.
What is it that I like this, but not this, and, but this is also true, and how do I bring it all together? And so it just keeps getting bigger, and because we keep making the connections.
Yeah. So then I think that carries us to a couple of other questions which I think are kind of tied together, which are, one, how do we using what we're learning, what's coming out of the consciousness movement, how do we address these really thorny issues in society, like these shooting rampages, like religious fanaticism, like ideological wars, all these really intractable human problems that we're facing, and how do we deal with those? And then what would a society that is built on the integral principles, integrative principles coming out of the consciousness movement, what would that look like?
Yeah, those are big questions.
Big questions.
Well, I think to understand what's going on in our country and the world today, I think, I actually believe the model works very well in describing what's going on.
Yeah.
And as far as you have these different, we kind of touched on this earlier a little bit about how the different levels are interacting. And we have, people at the traditional level, we have people at the rational level and the pluralistic level, and they're all kind of believe that they're right and everybody else should be like them.
Right.
And we have a world that's changing, rapidly, and people still trying to hold on to their traditional values in the midst of all this change. You have those that are, rational, and they want, at that stage, and they're, and they see that, they don't agree with others, and they think they're right, and, the pluralists think everybody should be more loving and caring, and they don't understand why everybody else can't see that. And they're all right to some degree, and each one is right from their own perspective. But I think, what we need is from that integral perspective, from that next level, who can see those things, to be able to now find ways to bring them together and to look past the differences, which we don't have any political leaders right now who are doing that, who says, okay, now let's find a common language and bring people to the same table. Right. We have more and more division, and people, almost it seems at times almost purposely creating division, even though they might not understand, they don't see the different levels as the model describes, but they know how to create division,
right,
and using it in such a way as to promote their own well-being, and whoever they are, like their power structure. So we're going to do this, and we're going to do this,
right.
And so you have religion and politics, and you have business and politics. You have everything kind of mixing. You have those who more on the pluralistic level who are want to they want a more loving and caring world, which is great. However, they want to do it by saying that everybody else is wrong,
right,
and minimize their beliefs and minimize their experience of the world. And so that's just actually entrenches people in their beliefs even further, creating more division.
right.
And so we just have all these different groups working together or working against each other. And I think it's a matter of, I think the consciousness movement maybe be able to provide a way, or at least a description of how to move forward in this, and and creating then a movement around it to say, no, everybody has a point,
Right.
and as a place at the table, and that we don't exclude people just because we don't agree with them. So,
Right.
So I'm not sure. That's, I think, one of the roles I think we have is to describe how we can come together
Yeah.
and create maybe a description and conditions that allow people to come together from different places. Or like the group you described, the different, people from different religions and different non-religions coming together. So creating dialogues, maybe that's something, from, that individuals and groups can do is create pockets of dialogue and then move forward with that.
Yeah. One of the things that I think about is I hear a lot of complaints of, oh, the politicians are just crooked, or, oh, business is so rapacious and all this kind of stuff, which, in my looking at things, I really believe that the way to create change is to pour your energy, and this, it's what Socrates said, the way to create change is to pour your energy into the new thing that you want to create. And there's an old saying, it's better to light a candle than curse the darkness. And so what I think the consciousness movement can help us do and can really help with this is, in a free society like a democracy, it's we the people that are the candles. Business caters to what's demanded. So if we don't like what business is doing, then we the people need to demand something else. Politicians cater to what their constituents demand. So if we the people don't like what the politicians are doing, we the people need to be the leaders and figure out what direction do we want to direct them to go. And I think there's been this is really oversimplistic, but I think there's been a large either unawareness or abdication of the responsibility of we the people to lead these institutions of society. And part of what we need to do is wake up we the people and open we the people's eyes to see, number one, the power that we have, and number two, how to use that power, and number three, where might we want to go with it. So I think that's a big part of it is education and raising the consciousness of the masses, because it's only when we raise the mass level of consciousness of a society that we're truly going to see the institutions change to reflect those. And then the other thing that I would say, and this is, when we get to this question of what would a society look like that's built on these principles coming out of the consciousness movement, that's built on integral and integrative principles, what would that look like? The best I can come up with is how I see that working out, and explaining this is really abstract and really difficult and really complex. So when I try and break it down in a way that I think maybe everybody can get around, is we start with this concept of you got one pie, and you have two guys that walk up to the pie, and one of them says, well, I want more than half. And the other guy says, well, that's too bad, because I want more than half. And so the traditional way of dealing with that is these two guys argue for half an hour over how they're going to divide this pie. Well, the consciousness movement would say, rather than take that half hour of argument over how this pie is going to be divided, let's take that half hour of energy and pour it into baking a new pie. So then both of them can have the whole pie. And so that's a very simple metaphor of, once we break free of the presumption that the other person is taking from us, and we recognize, we accord them the honor of recognizing the validity or potential validity in their perspective, then the new possibility of, hey, let's go bake another pie instead of fight over how to divide this. Once we get on board with them and say, you know what, initially I may not understand where they're coming from, but I'm going to accord them the respect of saying their perspective, even though I don't understand it, may well hold some validity that can help me move forward. And when we get there, then we get to this approach in society, the cooperative thing that I was talking about of, hey, let's you and I together go bake another pie. Then everybody gets more. Okay, so that's the simple picture of it. Take that up to, how does that manifest in the big picture when you're looking at a societal level? Well, one example that I would use, and this is kind of a pet project I've been kicking around in the back of my head, and I'm just going to call it Project NFL. And that's where you have, what if, hypothetically, what if we took each football team in the NFL and every season, you know, part of the way that we've drummed up interest in football and the season as it progresses in our team and the Super Bowl and, you know, involvement in that is we've told the marketing experts for the NFL have said, you know, we could really develop more interest if we told personal interest stories about the football players and the coaches, but mostly the football players. And we have people see these football players as human beings and develop a rapport, even though they haven't personally met them, but they develop an interest in them as a human being and they develop a rapport. And that really got a lot more people interested in football. Well, what if we took some of those human interest stories and we changed that a little bit and we said each season, each NFL team is going to sponsor or be a champion for an impoverished village in Asia or Africa. And each season, they're fighting for that village, and a portion of their revenues that they make goes to benefit that village, build infrastructure in that village, put in clean drinking water, put in schools, put in hospitals, put in the kind of infrastructure that will allow that village to move to the next level. Well, then what you've done is you've taken these athletes who are in a competitive contest of athletic prowess, and you've just made them champions for humanity. Because whoever their team, whoever their village is that they're championing, they're going to get a portion of the proceeds from that team. So if that team makes it all the way to the Super Bowl, that village is going to get a cut of that, and they're going to benefit. Well, not only have you taken athletes that have, you know, and transformed them into champions for humanity, because you're showing personal interest stories about these villages, you're raising awareness of what's going on in remote parts of the world and need that is out there. You have also just created the potential of significantly expanding the market for the football teams, because now mama, when she walks through and the football game is on, she's going to sit down and watch, because it's now an issue and has cleared an issue of, are the children in that village, are they going to get vaccines that they need? Are they going to get a school to go to? And so there is a nurturing and human element that's now been brought into this, which is going to interest the women in the game, and they see a reason to sit down and watch. So you've expanded the market for the football team. You've raised awareness of these difficult social issues. You're going to bring dollars to these villages. Everybody benefits. And it's by taking a synergistic approach, instead of excoriating the football players for being men out there slugging each other, you've now made them champions, and you're pulling in a way where everybody, if they participate in this, can synergistically benefit. So if you take that as just one example, if we move to an integral society that's based, you know, coming out of these principles coming from the consciousness movement, you're going to have people coming up with these kinds of ideas all the time, because they're going to be thinking synergistically. And we're going to have windows of opportunity we haven't even dreamed of yet. And through those windows of opportunity and through that expanded creativity, we're going to create ways that society can interact that's going to benefit everybody in ways we haven't even dreamed of.
Yeah, and as another example of that, I think of something we've done here at the church, and other churches have done it too, is, and I remember the conversation around it, says we want to give half of our cash donations away.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, you know, every time you have this conversation, every church I've ever been in, of course, you know, the church treasurer says, we can't do that, we can't do that, no. And we assure them over and over, it will actually bring in more money to the church. And that's always the case, and it was the case here, that once we started giving half the cash donations away, still giving that half away, the church ended up with even more money coming in, you know, to the treasurer, you know, treasury, just as much or more.
Yeah.
And it did not, you know, so just by giving things away, we actually increased, and I know it's counterintuitive to a lot
Right.
of people. It seems like, no, if you're giving it away, you're going to decrease money. No, because the institution has set the example of what generosity looks like. And so the more generous you are, then other people are more generous. And
Right.
it creates the habit, the virtue of giving
Right.
and of generosity and of, recognizing that, we want to make change in the world. It begins by us, giving. And so it creates this whole thing. And so, the synergistic element of it, that, once you take that step, you don't know what's going to happen.
Right.
And, to me, that's, when I don't really use the word in this conversation, but the idea of faith. And the way I describe faith has nothing to do with beliefs.
Right.
It has nothing to do with what you believe. Faith is all about trust in the process, trust in, that in certain things, whatever it is you put trust in. And trust it enough to move in the direction of that. So you take a step. And then once you take that step, you create new possibilities that you never could have imagined before.
Right.
And I know Joseph Campbell talks about that, others have talked about the same principle. Once you make that leap, anything else is possible, things that you could not imagine, doors open up that you could not have predicted. And I see it, in things I do at the church, things in my own life. Once I've taken that step, and it's scary, but to me, if it's not scary, then it's not faith.
Right.
It's just, you have to take that step, and then all of a sudden things work out in ways, or just opportunity arises that you never could have imagined, and that's and that's that synergy. It's just, you make it happen and create new ways of doing things. I love the idea of the NFL doing something like that, because it does now create. It's not just about people making money and getting rich. It's about, we're helping the world,
Right.
and we're making money ourselves. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but we're also helping others at the same time.
Right.
And they set the example of what that means, and
Right.
that will then promote more generosity and more giving. Says, oh, I could do something like that in my own life.
Right.
Or, we as a family
Exactly.
can do that, and we're going to sponsor this, or we're going to work this, or we're going
Right.
to do that. So it creates that whole element. It just expands it, and because that's. Just people just kind of need to see the example.
Yeah.
And then it just keeps going from there.
Yeah.
Love it. Love it.
All right. What else we got?
I've been tracking. Did you cover specifically how does the idea of God or divinity in general relate to discernment?
Yeah.
Okay, I missed that one. Why should people care? I think we've covered. Does raising it on a personal level increase happiness and joy?
I think we talked about that.
Yeah.
Don't you?
Maybe we use joy per se,
Okay,
but we
then
didn't.
I think you have everything else. I would like to go back in your reincarnation answer.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about you couldn't answer the question because there was a difference between soul consciousness and whatever the other kind of consciousness is you're talking about. Having studied under both of you extensively, I find that confusing, so I'm sure other people will too. So can you guys elaborate a little bit on what you're talking about?
Well, what's the confusing part?
Well, this seems like the same word is being used both ways.
Yeah, I would agree that in the sense that, consciousness, when we talk about, when people talk about reincarnation, they say consciousness is transferred from one body to another. And to me, that's, in that sense, it's a soul being transferred, or the idea of, where it's it is not, to me, it's different than how we're using it in the context of the consciousness movement. If we defined it, we defined it initially as, awareness, and
But the soul is what is aware, correct?
but what is a soul?
There we go. Why don't you guys tackle that? Why don't you ask that as if I'm not here asking it and tackle it?
What is the soul?
Yeah. And how does it relate to consciousness at all?
Well, I think in trying to get at what I think you're asking, when we talk about consciousness in the context of the consciousness paradigm, what we're endeavoring to do is, and correct me if I misspeak anything on your behalf, but what we're endeavoring to do is we're looking for where can we stand philosophically and intellectually that is defensible. So we can't prove, there's some arguable anecdotal evidence, maybe some evidence out there, but if you boil it down to, okay, let's talk hard science, we cannot prove that reincarnation occurs or does not occur. We can't definitively prove that either way. So from the standpoint of the consciousness paradigm, that would be an issue where you could create division if you take the assertion that reincarnation occurs or reincarnation does not occur. Either one of those would be an assumption based on what we can prove. And since we're trying to stay away from assumption because that's what creates argument, I think the safe, defensible position from the perspective of the consciousness paradigm is to say, we don't know for a fact whether reincarnation occurs or not, but we do know for some people it is helpful to view reality as though it does occur. And for some people it's helpful to view reality as if it doesn't occur. And either assumption is okay so long as you understand that whichever assumption you make is an assumption.
Yeah, the paradigm itself is inclusive of these different understandings of consciousness. It doesn't exclude the idea of the soul. It doesn't exclude those other, there's other ways of understanding how we talk about consciousness, whether it's from a scientific point of view or a scientific materialist point of view, which says it's just a product of the brain. It's an illusion of the brain. That's one perspective of consciousness.
Right.
And then, like you said, mentioned all the different levels of consciousness, including sleeping and dreaming and all these different types of things that people can talk about. There's altered consciousness that can be used for hallucinogenics and all these different aspects. But each one boils down to the use of consciousness to awareness. And we might look at it in different ways, but an atom being aware of itself enough to be consistent through time, or a soul being aware of itself and being consistent through time, that it can transgress from one body to another. That can be used that way. And it's one of the problems of our language, or language in general. It's imprecise. And so we try to be clear on how we described consciousness as being, this is what we mean by it, and not excluding anybody else or anything else, but this is it, and this from this perspective, which I guess would be more of a philosophical perspective, just so that we can define it, and understanding that if a consciousness or a soul can transfer from one to another, when we talk about it as our consciousness going from one body to another, then we understand it's the awareness that's going from one to another, even though maybe the memories aren't there or other aspects, but we can understand that we're just talking about that. And the fact of it, the awareness, we can talk about, I have an awareness, you have an awareness, you are an aware person, and we can all talk about that. And then we would disagree on whether that awareness goes to heaven or hell, or disagree on whether it's reincarnated. We would disagree on all these different things. And so we'd from the paradigm, we want to exclude those because those would be divisive. And so, but we recognize that we are each aware of ourselves, and we just can't prove one way or the other enough or even if we could, there's not maybe proof that everyone would accept. And so that creates division. So since that's what we're trying to get away from, we will let that, we can have that discussion, but outside of this one. It's a separate discussion.
We've talked about what might an integral society look like, and I know that you have mentioned to me that you are working on plans and designs for a book to kind of describe that. Can you talk about your book that you're working on?
Yeah, I mean, like you, I mean, I've read your book, I've read, many others like you, read a lot of the same books that describe, the integral model and consciousness paradigm, and it goes by a lot of different names. And I get a lot out of them, but I think of one of the ways we talk about this to other people, just as all the wisdom traditions in the world, that the best way, because language is so imprecise, because how we use words can be imprecise, one of the best ways to get new ideas across is through stories. Jesus did it through stories.
Right.
Buddha did it through stories.
Right.
That's how we communicate
Right.
these types of things. And so I have a novel in mind that kind of set in the future that kind of takes this model, the consciousness paradigm, and kind of places it on a society, set in the future, and that allows it to then to play with the ideas, and it just so that we can have a vision, some sense of what it might look like. Definitely not how it will look like, but just a sense of this is how a society based on these traditions that's now over time can evolve to what it really looks like and how it manifests itself with personal freedoms and what a government might look like or not, or lack of government, or what religion would kind of look like, how these different things that we're so accustomed to, how would they be changed, and how would just the human condition be changed by this model. And so taking real people, real characters that then can just express these ideas in ways that can be so people can understand them in different ways, and then how to integrate them into their own lives, but can start the dialogue on what a future society based on these ideas might look like. Because I really believe we need to have a vision in order to create it. Otherwise, we're just going to create it without, I used to be, before I was a minister, I was an architectural drafter. And so before you build a house, before you build a restaurant, before you build anything, you have plans.
Right.
You have a vision of what it's going to look like, and you know how things are going to be. It's not always exact how it's built, but you have to, that's your starting point.
Right.
And so this is kind of a blueprint of how, and it's not the blueprint, but it is a blueprint, and at least creates the dialogue around how we can now move forward. And unfortunately, I see it coming out as, there's got to be almost a disaster in order to recreate. That's how I'm going to make it happen, but I don't think it has to be that way. We don't have to have something that tears everything apart. I think we can build from where we are and create something new without totally destroying everything first.
Yeah.
I have to tell a story, so I have to create conflict and do all those things that stories require. But in real life, I think once we have an idea, once enough people have a vision of what we want to move towards, we can start moving there, and we'll get there faster if we have that vision rather than just going in the dark.
Yeah.
And how we get there, and this country, we founded on democratic principles. Now, our founding fathers didn't create those out of thin air. We had philosophers and theologians who were been writing and thinking about freedom and all these different ideas and what that looks like. And so when they decided we're going to do this, they were able to go back to John Locke. They were able to go back to all these different others and say, I like their ideas here, I like his ideas here, and they were able to build a constitution based on these ideas because somebody had already had a vision of what is possible.
Yeah.
So that's my ideas, and just kind of create something, a dialogue around it, and begin the process.
I think that's absolutely wonderful, and I cannot wait to read your book when
Well,
it comes out.
I can't wait to write it. I'm looking forward to it. It's quite a process, but I'm excited about it.
Excellent.
Thanks a lot.
I can't wait to make the screenplay.